For those of you that don't know me, I'm Barry Cranford, one of the organisers of the London CTOs. Also got Martijn and Steve on the call as well, who also organise it. I'm not a CTO myself. I am in fact a recruiter. I run a tech recruitment company called Repworks. I did well there. I didn't wince when I said I was a recruiter. I'm getting better at this. So I've been on a mission now for about 12 years to prove that recruitment can be a power of good in the tech industry. So the London CTOs is an example of that. So we've been helping organise it since 2011. And we've put together almost 100 events. And my personal passion in the whole thing is the mentoring aspect. So trying to use people we know or our network, our reach, to put those mentors together with people that are facing challenges. And this event is a great example of that. So we've got a number of aspiring CTOs, junior CTOs, new CTOs facing probably their first crisis. And we've got 7, 8, or maybe 9 people, I think, someone just recently signed up, who've said they're happy to mentor or share their stories. So that's what this whole thing is about. So without further ado, I'm going to go over to James McGibbon, if you're there, James, who I think you should have the first question.
Yeah, rather than a challenge of technology or recruitment or anything like that, I think one of the things that I would be particularly interested in hearing about would be how people handle crises between their other C-level executives. So for example, should a new CEO come in and they are somewhat hostile to the existing management staff, want to replace them with all of their own, that type of thing, how you would go about handling such a situation?
Yeah, Martijn.
So I find hostility or negative behaviors tend to stem from two things, right? Either that person is particularly has some stressors upon their life or their situation, so some hidden drivers that you are not currently aware of. And the trick is really to go and find out what the motivation is behind what their seeming hostility is, right? And often, taking them away from the work situation, I like walking side by side with people down the road for this because it's non-confrontational, is to find out what their motivation is in terms of in your particular example, wanting to remove the existing management and to bring in their own people. Now, they might be wanting to bring in their own people because they themselves are inexperienced, nervous, and want the comfort of having their own people around them, right? They may have been fed some information from the board that the current management have done some embezzling and this person wants to get rid of everyone. So finding that out and putting yourself in the other person's shoes first, and you have to be the bigger person here because it's really hard, is an important first step.
Great, yeah, Steve.
So I don't have a whole lot to add to that, but I mean, a lot of the time the CEO will have been brought in specifically to replace the existing management. But either way, getting to know them and understand what they're trying to achieve and why they're trying to achieve it is probably the starting point.
Yeah, Graham.
Yeah, so I totally agree with previous two speakers. The other thing I found is CEOs want to be sure that the technology team can deliver on the strategy of the company, and having a CTO that's too much on as a defender of the technology team, I think winds up CEOs and senior leadership. In fact, in my experience, it's better for you to identify with the leadership team of the company as your primary team and to be the interface into the tech team rather than being the most senior technologist, defending the tech team. And I think whilst many of us have been hands-on people in the past and perhaps been developers and engineers, you have to transition yourself to being that strategic leadership person, and don't go too local in defending, because that will just wind up the leadership team.
Is it Ashley or Ashel? Sorry,
Ashley. Yeah, it's fine.
Ashley.
Yeah, what both guys have just said is absolutely spot on. So I've kind of a reverse of what's happened there. I've recently joined a group company that's got five sub-companies. They've organically grown very fast. And what I've been brought in to do is to take them to another level of executing of where they're going. And what I've done as part of that is, when I've joined the leadership team, kind of built the confidence in the team first of all, as to why we're doing things, what the logic behind it is, why we have to do it, and kind of get them on board on the journey and take them on the journey of digital transformation. And at first it was obviously, you're a new person in the business, you're bringing some radical ideas possibly that they've never thought of. But as things evolve and they start to build the confidence, you'll find that it becomes less of a challenge. And what I've done is strategically place myself as strategy and use my IT manager as the operational execution plan and bridge the gap between. So I'm kind of sitting on the fence and liaising with both parties and making sure that everyone's aligned on making sure that the strategy follows, you know, the vision of the company, whilst executing technically and you know, feeding that in and getting people's buy-in as we go. And what's happened is over the last 7 months, I've found that it's become easier and easier to get them on board because they've started to build in the trust in what we're doing.
Great, thanks guys. Okay, and Yadu, did you have a question there?
Yeah, no, not a question, but just to second what Ashley just mentioned. So we work with a lot of high growth companies, and CTOs, especially those who work in either low trust environments or who are newly joined and where trust is yet to be built. I highly recommend what Ashley just said, is that in such times, and in fact, not during such time, but at any point in time, if a CTO can go back to the CEO or the CFO and say that, look, this is how I see the current situation and this is my plan. Do you see the same way as I do? Do you have any more information? I think that goes a long way towards building more trust and getting the rest of the CXOs on board with what a CTO is trying to do.
Great, thanks everyone. Appreciate those answers for that. Okay, I'll move on then. We're just over the 5-minute mark on that. So one thing I'm really interested in, obviously the title of this was about how to manage in a crisis. So would anyone be happy to talk through previous crises that they've been through, and specifically what leadership skills you gained from those? Steve.
I'm not sure. So I was running a fintech company through the banking collapse, which was obviously not a great environment. We literally made no sales for 18 months, and but that was all about just sort of taking stock of the situation. I was relatively inexperienced CTO. I'd only been doing it for 5 or 6 years at that point, but the management team around me were all very experienced, so they'd kind of been through similar things before. But it was just about one of the things that they said that stuck with me was, don't like nickel and dime it. Figure out what you need to do and just execute. So we laid off like a third of the company and sort of retrenched in a lot of ways. I kicked off a big IT project to reduce costs because our IT costs were pretty astronomical. Which up until that point hadn't really been a concern. We immediately went out and raised money because we knew that it was going to hit our industry very hard. So we went and raised money from VCs and got some venture debt and all kinds of things. But it was really tough. Probably the hardest couple of years of my career. I'm not sure I really picked up any leadership skills other than, I guess, a lot of people management in terms of, reducing the size of the team dramatically, but keeping everyone else engaged and not scaring everyone in the company too much, which I think is different in this crisis because it's kind of hitting all industries. But that situation was difficult for us because our industry was hit significantly harder than many others. And then the upside was that coming out the far side of it was a very good experience for us. We queued up some sales leads during the process when we weren't closing any deals, but as soon as the crisis was over, we had an amazing run of kind of like a year's worth of capitalizing on the relationships we were building during the crisis. So it is worth keeping up. And one of the things that I'm doing in the current situation, which didn't really apply in the old company, and I don't know how successful it will be, but is refocusing the product development onto near-term things that will help us maintain existing B2B clients. Because we recognize that it's going to be difficult to close deals, so let's work as hard as possible in keeping the current client base. It's obviously different if you're in a B2C world, but in B2B, that's the key thing. I think that's probably all I've got to say.
That's great advice. I think that's really interesting to hear what you went through there. Was there anything that you feel looking back you would have done differently when you went through that crisis at the time? Anything that looking back you'd go back and change, knowing now what you do?
I don't think so. I think probably we should have executed the strategy slightly earlier, but there was all kinds of things going on. The company was in a bit of a state at that point as well, so there was other challenges. But I think overall, without access to a time machine, I think it was more or less the right strategy.
Thanks for that, Steve. Don't know, my mic's playing up a bit here. Nick, did you have something that you wanted to add or ask?
I wanted to ask Steve, actually. You used that phrase, don't nickel and dime it. I wonder if you could give one or two examples of, I would have done this, but I remembered you don't need to nickel and dime it, so I actually did that. Sort of just what the difference that made in one or two situations.
Yeah, so I mean, the two big ones were in terms of redundancies, which is obviously never a fun experience, but there were two options. We could have laid off 3 people a month for 6 months, or we could have just laid off a third of the company in one go. And I think that it's much easier for the rest of the staff to deal with a big cut suddenly than people dribbling out of the business over months. And the other one was fundraising. We took a big hit on our valuation by raising a lot of money up front, but by doing that, we could then focus on running the business. So it would have been, on paper, it probably would have been better to raise small amounts of money regularly, but just distraction for the leadership team's way too big. And we were very low on cash, so we knew we had to raise money. And we were pretty sure that it wasn't going to turn around within 18 months, or a couple of years. So we raised enough money to survive us through that process once we've made the cuts to OPEX.
Thanks very much. I think it's one of those things that there's a lot of it going around. Every mountain has a peak, and these clouds will pass. I think that's one big lesson from that, is that these things do come to an end.
There is one caveat to that. I think in this situation, in the current business, we're expecting the aftershock to be more post when everything's released up, because it varies obviously depending on what your product is, but our product is it's a very expensive subscription product for big businesses, and we expect their budgets in 2021 financial year to be hit, not their budgets in 1920. So that's something to bear in mind.
Steve, are you considering repositioning your product to kind of meet the new economy? If the economy doesn't reconfigure back to the normal state and you have to sell into what is a very different world?
Yeah, so we changed our marketing message slightly to emphasize some of the budget control aspects of it. So one of the things that can help you do is defend, justify, and potentially grow your budget. And a lot of our clients are very concerned about having their budgets taken away, and they're historically not been very financially astute. So they just sort of rolled with whatever the business demanded. And we're sort of giving them some some financial and economic data to help fight back against budget cuts, which obviously helps us, but also helps them as well. A lot of our clients are being asked to make very significant headcount cuts, or will be.
Okay, did anyone else have anything that they just wanted to add or ask Steve off the back of that? Yes, Ashley.
Yeah, so just to add a few points on, completely agree with what Steve said. We operate a fail fast model. So rather than constantly trying to drag things out and get it back on track, sometimes it's actually a better option to cut your losses, jump out and put the right solution in. It can be far more cost effective in the long term. Not that I'm in a finance position at the minute, but I have previously been CTO of a company that was raising finances, so I can echo what he was saying. The amount of, we opted to go for the other option, which was do small bursts to retain value in the company, and the amount of time that it took backwards and forwards with documentation, legals, clarification, and then we got a bit of money, and by that point we actually needed to then start on raising more money. So sometimes it isn't cost effective, and that was like a real detriment to that business. But just one other thing I would like to kind of put from my own point of view, something that I've brought into this business was I started to address, the very first thing was a disaster recovery plan. And you know, a growing company might not have thought of that. If you're in big corporates, you'll probably be covered, but just I'm not sure what everyone's background is here and what size of the companies are. But I went away straight away and to try and hit them hard with a message was, I said, what would happen if this, you know, if a plane crashed into the building? Would we be in a position to pick back up? What could we do? What could we not do? And I don't think anybody had thought of it as that dramatic, but very coincidentally, you know, I kind of started that journey 6 months ago with this business, and all of a sudden we're hit with this crisis. If I hadn't have addressed them issues early on to such a, you know, a serious level, we wouldn't be able to trade like we are now. And we've just managed to send 300 people home in the space of a week, and business continuity is just, you know, it's almost like it's not affected us. But that was planning that the business hadn't thought about, and it took technology leadership to kind of drive that message into the business, put some reasoning behind it. And obviously now it's almost like we've rode in on white horses and fixed the situation. So it's yeah, just something to think about.
I think that's great advice. I have had one question that's come in directly. So the question is, how would you deal with layoffs, and specifically how to deal with the emotional hit on the team there? Anyone with any thoughts on that? Yeah, Steve.
I don't want to. Yeah. Anyway, so I think transparency is the answer there. You just have to be open with everyone. Like, if people accept that it's necessary economically, then it's much easier to communicate it than just to say, oh, we've just laid off a bunch of people. So in the previous company where we did have to make substantial layoffs, we just disclosed what our burn rate was, how much money we had in the bank, what the situation was like, and then people were behind it. Conversely, in my current company, we've looked at it. It doesn't really make any sense because as a company, we're currently very busy still. So if we laid people off, it would significantly impact our ability to execute, and the cost savings not so great because it's not such a large workforce. But I'd say transparency and communication is basically the answer. It's the only tools you've got to help you, right?
And anyone else with any other comments or anything around maintaining team morale around that? Yeah, Victor.
Yeah, I'm thinking now when we have the new laws with the furlough, or it's kind of one way rather than layoffs, we can put people on furlough, and how to deal with that. Because I'm thinking about the nickel and dime comment before. It's like, because there you go halfway, right? And it might make the communication less precise. And any thoughts about that?
Yeah, Steve again.
Yeah, I'll shut up in a minute. I think that's a really good example, though, of where you have to be careful about nickel and diming. Like, so what would leave a negative impression with people if you furloughed people and then laid them off afterwards? So, but the economic modeling's pretty easy in terms of how much money you're saving, and if you doubt that you'll be able to take those people back as employees in the future, then you shouldn't be furloughing them. But yeah, it's all about understanding what the economic situation is and what it will do to your budget.
Yes, Timothy, did you have a question or something to add there?
Yeah, I do have a question about that specific issue. Having discussed it with other leaders, I do feel like you're basically, by not furloughing, you are dropping someone off into kind of economic uncertainty and with no safety net. So I'm curious, the rationale from a business perspective to lay off instead of when furlough is an option, even though you may doubt that you can lay them off later. What is could you maybe go into a little bit more depth there about the reasons for that? Because it does feel like the impact on the individual in question is pretty large, while the risk for the business seems low.
Well, I guess it depends on the type of employee. So the people that, I've never had this option before, so I haven't really thought through the implications of it. But if you're furloughing high-paid employees, you've either got to make up their salary or they're taking a significant financial hit. And depending on the industry you're in, they may or may not be able to find more work in the near future. It just depends on the employees. But you're right, there could be a sort of moral imperative to furlough people, even if you think you're going to have to lay them off anyway. But the objective of the furlough plan, as far as I see it, was to allow you to retain staff that you will have a need for in the future. I don't know what the regulations are in terms of furloughing people and then laying them off. You'd have to talk to an HR person about whether that's likely to land you in hot water.
Great, thanks, Steve, for that. Anybody, any follow-up questions on that at all, or? No? Okay, great. Okay, so one thing we sort of touched on this a little bit, but one thing I'm interested in is whether you think it's possible to find opportunities in times such as these, and so how do you keep your mind open to this idea? How do you find the opportunities in the through the dark times? Graham, yeah.
Yeah, so just for context, I'm not an active CTO at the moment. I was up until the end of last year and previously for many years at Photobox. But I've been doing some free coaching. There's a lot of demand for it right now, and I know some of you are on the call at the moment. I think it depends what stage of company you are. If you're pre-revenue, you still have a lot to worry about, clearly. The potential for further funding rounds to be delayed or your traction to be delayed. But for pre-revenue companies, this is actually a good opportunity to be given extra time to build out your product and also to adapt very quickly to a very changing set of circumstances. So I've seen some pre-revenue companies pivot very quickly to filling gaps in the market, to getting a lot of publicity for their service, particularly when they're helping key workers or filling a need. I think even if you're at the revenue stage, you still have an opportunity to be able to adapt quite quickly. But I think later stage companies, Series A and beyond, are suffering much more because they're seeing if you're recurring revenue, for example, you're seeing your ARR drop to a small fraction of what it used to be. But there are opportunities, and the other thing I've been advising companies is don't try and focus so much on revenue capture right now. Try and focus on momentum. I think some companies don't have a choice. They need to go for whatever the revenue they can get right now, but that's always going to be smaller than normal times, and you will sacrifice some growth potential by really trying to focus on revenue. So see if you can build up a wider user base, wider awareness, and when this crisis inevitably ends or starts to reduce in its impact, you want to come out of that with a lot more momentum.
That's great advice. Has anyone got any specific examples of when they've been able to do that, or anything that any opportunity they found in a crisis? Yeah, Ashley.
Sorry, I feel like Steve constantly taking the airtime. Yeah, no, we've got one of our businesses has got a production and manufacturing capability, and what we've done is during this we've rapidly adapted it because we've got all the skills, the capabilities. So we've started producing hand sanitizer, and we're going to be pushing that out into like local police forces and places like that who are struggling to get their hands on it. So it's some might see it as a, you know, exploiting an opportunity, but we just have the manufacturing capabilities and the skill sets to be able to do it. So we've rapidly changed that round, and trying to build sustainability. You know, keep the wheels moving, keep the staff employed, because we feel like we've got a duty and obligation to, you know, to pay these people. So we're just looking for opportunities in the current market, and we're putting a heavy focus on our next financial year to, you know, build up the capabilities there. So even if we can't make the orders and transactions now, have the ability to have that all lined up. So when we come out of it, we hit the ground running to, you know, to play catch up and get back on track.
That's great. Thank you. And any other comments? Anyone else want to add anything about opportunities that have arisen in such times? Yeah, Marte.
The advice is always to start startups during times of crisis. It's actually, statistically speaking, the best time to start a successful startup. So I started my company, J Clarity. Well, I'm now at Microsoft, we got acquired, but we started our J Clarity almost deliberately during an economic crisis point. And again, it helps you be really disciplined, it helps you be really lean, and it helps you start looking at the challenges that the future economy is going to face. And those are excellent opportunities abound everywhere. And on a more personal level, there are a ton of companies and VC firms and private equity firms and incubators who are looking for advice. So if you can do some interim CTO work, especially on managing a crisis, if you know how to lay people off and that sort of thing, which is a horrible thing, but it is necessary, then there is a ton of advisory work out there at the moment.
Yes, Graham. Thanks,
yeah,
Martin.
just leading on from what Martin just said, it works on the flip side as well. There's so much talent available right now, either because they're out of work or they're furloughed or they're between projects. I don't think companies should feel at all bad about reaching out and trying to get people to help them. Free advice, there's plenty of that around. This event shows that there are lots of people willing to spread advice right now, and maybe the people that wouldn't previously have been affordable for startups or growth stage companies are now willing to come in and help.
Yeah, that's great advice. Okay, does anyone else have any questions on any part of this at all, or anything else that they want to jump in with at this point? I've got a few more things lined up if not. Conscious that we're approaching, or we've just gone over one actually. So if anybody's now got calls, needs to drop off, then feel free. I know we tend to see things start going down at this point, so feel free. It's absolutely fine. But I have one question then that I'd like to ask those that said they're happy to mentor or share stories. Given a lot of the people on this call and people watching will be, as I said at the beginning, like first time CTOs, very new to the role and thrown into this. Do you have maybe one lesson, one thing that you'd like to, you know, from all the experience that you've had that you would be able to pass on for people in that position? James, sorry, yeah, sorry.
You're muted, James.
Thanks, keyboard wasn't working. Actions speak louder than words is an old saying, but it is incredibly true. And people may say things, but until you start seeing them follow through, either through written statement or actual actions, then don't necessarily believe them.
Great, thanks, James. Anyone else that's got something to add? Owen, yes.
I've been through 2 crises before. Not that I specialise in them or anything, but I was in Silicon Valley in the collapse of the dot-com boom. I arrived 6 months beforehand. Luckily, going back to, I think, Steve's point about raising money, luckily our startup was run by a very eccentric guy, but a guy who saw the future and did raise a lot of money, so we survived. But the more relevant one is probably 2008, when I was at one of the, well, at that time, the world's largest fund manager. A thing I saw a lot of was people had never seen a crisis like this in fund management before, especially people under 50. They had just been used to making good money every year, and frankly, in many cases, not even being very difficult. And there was a massive amount of overreaction right across the business, which I'm sure I wasn't immune from. It's easy to get emotional in a situation where you see your life's work is being ripped from you. But it's really important to find some way, especially if other people around you are behaving really emotionally, to find a way of just finding a bit of space to think out a response and think, actually, how bad is it really? Because it's nearly always not as bad as it looks now, and it's probably not as good as everyone's hoping in the long term either. But it's somewhere in between. That will allow you to create a much more measured response, and then to go back to several people have said radical transparency. Share that thinking with people, because there's nothing reassures people more than a leader who seems to be logical, seems to be based on the data, and seems to have a plan.
Anybody else? Thanks for that, Owen. That was some great advice. Does anyone else have anything they want to add? Yeah, Ashley.
Yeah, so just, I don't know if this will work for everybody, but it certainly worked for me in my current business. What I've done is I set out myself like a mandate for the coming quarter, and I share that with the leadership team to basically just set out what I'm going to aim to do in that quarter, and then that's what I report against, you know, either weekly, monthly, and just show that, you know, because a lot of digital transformation plans don't happen overnight. You know, they take time to get the system in place, get the testing done. You know, it goes through a few iterations of updates and various other things that you find along the journey. And I think communication is a, you know, a real key part of it, and it builds in the trust in your CEOs and the other leadership team members. Keeping them up to date with what's happening just makes it seem a little bit clearer than going away, locking yourself away and coming out with a finished product at the end. But setting that mandate out and updating against it has been basically the way into the leadership team for me.
Great, thanks, Ashley. And Graham, see your hand up there.
Yeah, so I think there's lots of things I wish I'd done differently in the earlier years, but the 2 things that I advise people most now. One is that when you're a CTO, you often kind of get head down and you're very busy with projects and with people, and you come into work and you go through this busy work process all week where you don't have enough time to do anything, and you're just in this cycle. And the thing I advise people to do is to pick one Monday morning when you come into work and reevaluate the whole job as if it was your first day on the job, and pretend that everything you've inherited on your desk is the work of your crap predecessor, and just reevaluate from scratch. Are we running the right projects? Do we have the right people? Do we have the right tech stack? Is it right to take that piece of work on? And often if you look at things with a fresh pair of eyes, you figure out that perhaps you're not focused on the right things, and perhaps you're spreading yourself too thin and your team too thin. So It's that kind of mindset of coming into work as if it were your first day on the job is something that people should do regularly, at least once a quarter. And the second thing we've already covered, which is just talk to more people outside the company more, spread your, share your concerns, listen to feedback, and often just explaining to somebody what your problem is gives you new insight as to how to go back and deal with it. Those are my 2 tips.
That first one, how on earth do you do that? So how do you, because I'm like thinking about that and thinking, yeah, I quite fancy having a go at that. Trying to think about our business in that way. But how do you pull yourself so far out of everything that is so you to be able to? I think
I discovered that because I had in 2007. So we'd grown Photobox organically to be UK market leader. We'd merged with the French company, expanded into Europe, and suddenly become a pan-European company. And I took on at that point, I switched from CEO to CTO. And I said naively, I'm going to build one tech platform, one web platform that will be the master website for Europe. We'll do everything, one brand. And I said, give me a team of 12 people in 9 months. And of course, I was so naive and wrong. And 2 years later, I was still not on the other side of this project. And I was personally burnt out. I was hospitalized with palpitations and all kinds of things. And I wanted to quit, and my CEO wouldn't let me. And I had no choice but to kind of come back to work and reevaluate everything from scratch. So that's where that came from. It did work. It was slow and painful. And the best thing is not to let things get to complete crisis point before you do it. But it does work.
Yeah. Wow. I like that. Okay. So that's pretty much it for my questions. Again, I'll ask, does anyone have any final questions they'd like to throw out to the panel, to each other? No? Okay, cool. Just a few things then in closing. Firstly, please give us feedback. We're trying to improve these with everyone. So every time we get 5 or 10 feedback forms in, I'll contact all of you with just a Airtable form. So if you can fill that out, really appreciate it. If anyone's looking for tech staff, give us a call. I'm not going to make a big pitch, but we can help you place developers. So yeah, feel free to get in touch. And finally, again, you're welcome to log off at this point, but one bit of recurring feedback that we get is around the challenge that Zoom calls have in an ability to kind of have the good bit of a talk where you see a talk and then afterwards you talk to a few other people, grab a coffee or a beer or whatever. So we've downloaded this breakout rooms thing on Zoom. I've never done it and I'm keen to do it. So if anybody, obviously I know a lot of you will probably be busy, so won't be able to, but I've never pressed this button, so I don't know what's going to happen. So I'm keen to do it. So if you fancy sticking around and seeing what happens, then please do. And yeah, if you've got to go, then obviously understand that. But I'm going to press this button. I'll probably try and get into smaller breakout rooms. So if you fancy being in those, and again, if I can't bring you all back, then obviously please do leave some feedback. But no, thanks for everyone that's asked questions. Obviously, everyone that's been prepared to share your stories. I'm sure this advice is just invaluable to people that are going through this for the first time. So yeah, I really appreciate it. And with that, I'm going to press this button and see what happens.